Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world. Powered by Leadership Choices.
Welcome to Leaders Talk, the interview podcast for better leadership, better organizations, and a better world. My name is Carsten Draht. I'm your host today, and I'm one of the managing partners of Leadership Choices. Today is a special episode, a special podcast, because we are broadcasting parts of our virtual conference, the Open University. The topic of the conference is organizational purpose, opportunity, or opportunism. And we start this podcast with a keynote, with an interview with Stuart Pickles. Stuart Pickles is the former CFO of Fosters, the beer company, the lager company, then became a coach, and now is becoming or has become a social and climate activist. And the title of his keynote is What Keeps Me Up at Night. And so this will be this episode. And in the next episode, we will broadcast the panel discussion of the Open University conference to you, but that's another story. Now, let's move on to my conversation with Stuart Pickles. Let's go there. So great to have you with us, Stuart. Welcome, and thank you for being with us.
That's a very great pleasure, Carsten. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Stuart, we start this discussion where normally such a discussion would end, namely, you were the CFO of a large multinational organization called Fosters. Fosters is in the booze business, beer, brewery. I think they at one point had 4.6 billion revenue, so it was not a very small company really. And you've been the CFO of that organization. How did that come about?
Well, that's an interesting question. I started out. I was actually going to be a lawyer originally. I did a law degree, and but I spent time working in the legal profession, and that didn't attract me. I found the world of business somehow much more people oriented and people friendly. So I joined Unilever and on their grad scheme and trained as an accountant. I thought, well, if I was going to be a lawyer now, I need to do something that has some kind of qualification. And I spent 25 years working in the food and drinks industry with Unilever, also with Kraft Foods, and then, as you say, latterly Fosters, and was CFO for their European business. And and spent some time working 4 years in Japan during that time, and also 4 years based in Australia working in Asia. So an amazing experience. And I guess during that time, I learnt lots about how organizations can perform successfully. Of course, the measurement of success was always around profit and cash and growth. And the age of shareholder supremacy, and I have to admit it was exciting and enjoyable in many ways to learn how to do that and to be part of organizations that were successful. I was also parts of organizations that weren't so successful, but I guess throughout that the duration of that time, and even from very early on, I had a very deep sort of discomfort about the system. If I look back now, if I'm really honest with myself, I think I suppressed these feelings at the time. But both in terms of people and in terms of environment, I think that in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a lot of kind of reorganizations and retrenchments, and people always came second to profit, right? Always came second to profit, and at the same time, I would find myself as an auditor going not just around the UK, but around the world, looking at factories. And Unilever, for example, and Kraft and Fosters would have been probably the more law-abiding organizations. I don't think I saw much that was illegal, but nevertheless, I saw an awful lot that was ugly in terms of environmental impacts. The quantities of just if you think about the packaging, or if you think about the waste, the sheer volumes when you go into these factories and see this, and I'm sure other people here work in organizations that do this, there's just something that feels very uncomfortable about that. I guess that was I'm talking to you now more about what that experience was, and what kind of leads us into the kind of conversation we're having today about purpose and leadership. I think in terms of what I learned about purpose and leadership during that time was that, first of all, in terms of leadership, this is an interesting exercise to do. Actually, I once stopped and counted up all the bosses that I had, and I came to 20. So over 25 years, 20 bosses. I guess you move around yourself, and then when you're in a role, bosses change as well. So, and there were some really good bosses and some not so good bosses, as you can imagine, and I'm sure it's the same for you. And when I really think about the characteristics of what the good leaders were, then more than anything else, it was really just about just how human they were, just how authentically they were connected to themselves on a human level, and their ability to connect on a human basis with others. And some had it and some didn't, or some had it more than others, put it that way. And I think that also kind of read across to purpose. I think, when I started in 1986, people weren't, purpose statements weren't saying much about being, creating a better future. That obviously started to happen as we moved through. And I think that, whether it was just conventional visions and missions and purposes, or whether they started becoming more broadly defined, for me, the test always was the realism. Of what we were really saying we were wanting to do. And
was there something like an explicit purpose for Fosters or Unilever, that something that you kind of repeat?
Yeah, they did, but that back in those days, they I'm not going to be able to remember the strap lines, but generally, they would be talking. I remember Unilever started talking about a better world quite early on, and obviously, I'm quite proud to have been involved with Unilever since, of all of the multinationals across and corporates across the world, with Paul Polman and leadership initially, and continuing now. They've got a great reputation, and so they started moving in that direction. For me, it was. When I look back, it was realism was the key. The realism and the connection back to, we here as humans, this purpose is relevant for us. It's real. I understand how we're going to get to that. But I think, even Unilever, a lot of that would still have been very much stated in or linked in with the whole notion of achieving growth, market share, and all of those metrics, and they weren't talking about the externalities, the environmental externalities, the social marginalization, or the importance of social justice, or any of those sorts of things. So I was involved in, there was some times where there was great realism, but probably it was not fully informed by those things as well. So
it was like this Milton Friedman paradigm: the business of business is business.
Right.
So the shareholder capitalism, as you call it, and then you made a fundamental decision to change your career, like many coaches do. And at one point, they want to change their career. What was your reason to leave the safety, the big paycheck, the bonus, the impact, the gold card status with any airline? What made you leave that world?
Yeah. Well, and Carsten, it was soon after that I met you, so you may remember some of this story anyway. But when I started working for Fosters as CFO, quite soon after that, we had some coaching, and we were coached individually and collectively as a team. This was 2005, so. Back in those days, still not so common. It's obviously a different world now. It's much more common, isn't it? And converted by that experience, I guess. Some of that was about challenging and being clearer about my own authentic purpose and my identity, like who am I? Those sorts of questions that we ask in coaching. And I think it transformed my own leadership. I've often said that suddenly leadership got a whole lot easier. So that was interesting, wasn't it? I think what I realized was that whilst I probably meant well, but what I didn't realize was, and this was because I became part of the system, right? I was focusing so much on results that I wasn't really focusing enough on people. And I think that was the biggest single thing that I learned through that whole process of, the more you focus on people, actually, the more you get results. So I ended up becoming qualified, not with a view to changing career, but just because it just seemed to me that coaching was such a fantastic tool, and sort of a key as well to unlocking this kind of, so a place where you can talk about performance and people, where you can talk about sort of profit and our sense of humanity in an authentic way, and I guess what was also interesting around about that time, and this really probably was the thing that kind of sort of got me over the line at a somatic level, at a, my body and the whole of me, spiritually and whatever you want to describe, was I went on a leadership program with an organization called Leaders Quest to Johannesburg, and whilst we were there, so I spent some time. We were sent off individually to spend time and with different people. I spent time with a community leader who was an ex-criminal who had been rehabilitated and was now a community leader, and doing extraordinary things in great adversity, and his whole story of turning around, and I think probably for the first time in my life, I saw deprivation and, when we talk about social marginalization, really, the most extreme kind of impacts of that. And so it really opened my eyes, sort of, I guess, at a new level. We also, whilst we were there, we were looking at things like some of the industrial pollution problems, and again, kind of the economic system at its worst. And I kind of realized that, we're just so blinkered. We live in our comfortable social world, in our comfortable social, kind of professional jobs, earning our money for ourselves, earning our money for our shareholders. But on either side of the blinkers, there's all of the externalities of environmental damage, and then the social marginalization that's happening on the other side. That it was interesting. So I think when I look back, my reasons for going into coaching was that I just thought, I just want to bring more humanity into organizations, and I think I can do that more effectively if I'm coaching all the time, and I'm not spending more of my time trying to make profit for the next quarter. So that was, I guess that's the story of how that change happened.
Thank you, Stuart. And then, we have been in touch ever since, speaking like once, twice a year, so I'm catching up. And I think it's probably 3 years ago that I started realizing a shift in you. And that shift was that you talked about social justice, climate change topics with more depth, with more, this is really something that is bothering me. This is really something close to my heart. This is not a topic like many others. This is like driving me, right? So can you walk us through, were there some pivotal moments where, like the ones that you just shared, where you came to the realization that this is something that even concerns you in a coaching role, in a professional role?
Yeah. Yes, I think so during the, so that was just, funnily enough, it was 10 years in January, Carsten, actually, that I made that shift. So it's amazing, isn't it, how 10 years flies by. And I guess, so I obviously been developing my practice from that starting point, finding myself challenging and supporting leaders, and just, from quite early days, finding myself able to especially in one-to-ones, disrupting, that challenge around what's your purpose, what's your legacy. And I started finding very early on that most people do want to make, leave a legacy. Most people do want to make the world, leave a better world. They may not know how to do that, and they may not feel comfortable sharing with their professional colleagues and so on. But then as time moved on, I think things changed. Paris in 2015, I think, was quite a big turning point. There was this sense that this awareness was beginning to become mainstream. And so that certainly was one thing. And I started finding myself actually having conversations with executive teams and actually when we were asking what's the collective legacy that this team wants to leave, and asking just more challenging questions. What does this generation of leaders, what's the legacy that this generation of leaders needs to leave for the next, and just digging deeper into that. And again, finding actually that people really did want to talk about it. And so I started getting a bit more hopeful. I guess then you could probably say Trump and Brexit happened, and that probably set us all back a couple of years, I would say. Honestly speaking, if we look back, and I think what's happening now and what's in the mainstream awareness now, I think would have happened maybe a little bit sooner. But anyway, that's history. I guess obviously Attenborough then, and Greta and Extinction Rebellion, and Zoe is here, who was a founding member of, is involved in Extinction Rebellion. She's also a founding member of the Climate Coaching Alliance, which I'll talk about later. But and lovely to have you here, Zoe. I guess there's a couple of things that happened. You asked me specific turning points. And sorry, then of course George Floyd and Black Lives Matter happened. So those things have all happened. 6 months before George Floyd, I and my team here had a one of those away days, and we'd been challenging ourselves on diversity, and so we said, okay, well, let's have an unconscious bias training day, and we invited somebody in called Razia Aziz from the Equality Academy, who I can thoroughly recommend. And she, I have never felt so deeply disrupted on a personal level. She held up the mirror and just pointed really directly at my privilege, our privilege. It's not often you invite somebody into your house and they're quite as rude as that. I must admit, I found it really difficult, but God bless her, because it took great courage for her to do that. And it really, she talked about this kind of the idea of a level playing field, or an unlevel playing field, and obviously, as a white male, straight, etc. I'm at the top of the playing field on every measure. And she had, she talked about this idea of with privilege comes penalty. You can't enjoy privilege without realizing that there is somebody who lacks the privilege, and you have no idea how hard it is for people to get out of bed each day and try and play, a game of football uphill. And actually, we're playing football downhill every day. So went away, with a lot of deep reflection from that. And then George Floyd did happen, and Black Lives Matter, and I found myself going deeper and deeper. I then spent nearly 6 months trying to summon up the courage to publish an article about this, which I finally did in December of last year, which I called, it was all about leveling the playing field. And so, yeah, I think I'm on a journey. There's lots of education to be done. I've since been, trying to read a number of books on this subject. White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and Me and White Supremacy by Renieto Lodge. I guess some of you may have heard of these books. Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. So that was one thing. I guess the other thing, coming back to the climate subject, there's a guy called Mac McCartney. I don't know if you've heard of him. He has written a book called The Children's Fire. And I first saw Mac actually in 2014, I think it was, where he gave a talk. So he's a guy who spent a lot of time working with indigenous communities and leaders in largely in North America, but not exclusively. And they told him the story of that when they meet and talk about what's important for them and for their community, they always have some stones around the fire, which are left empty for the children who are of future generations. 7 generations hence, actually, I think was the idea. So that whenever they made any decision, they were always thinking that far in advance, which is extraordinary, isn't it? When you think about the wisdom, the simplicity and power of that wisdom. And that's always stuck with me, that idea. So I guess that alongside everything else that's been happening at a macro level, there's just this realization of the scale of the change, isn't there? And I've been using this metaphor of the permafrost is melting. And the permafrost obviously is a good metaphor for climate change, because it literally is. The permafrost is melting. But as if you think about permafrost melting, then things become revealed to us. For the first time, they've been frozen probably forever, and we're suddenly realizing the the extent of the injustices, both social injustices and also, and to be honest, the climate catastrophe that we're causing and we're still complicit in is the worst injustice of them all, because how many billions and trillions of unborn people, our lives are we affecting as a result of allowing this to continue? So that's probably some of the milestones along the way that have kind of gotten me to this. As you said, you detected it. I remember one or two of those conversations when your reaction to what I was saying made me realize that I was beginning to speak with more conviction about this, and couldn't stop myself. Yeah.
And I mean, we are all, so what I observe is that all the companies that we work with, that we talk to, all the colleagues that we talk to, nobody says, you know what, today I'm doing something to destroy our planet, right? I mean, nobody consciously wants to do that. On an individual level, people probably support Greenpeace, whatever, and then they work in an organizational context where somehow the context does prevent, seemingly, to do something against it. Now, as an entrepreneur, as you are in your own rights, sticking your neck out, taking a position might have an impact on your clients to say, whoa, Stuart is changing. He's no longer a clean professional. He's now an activist coach. I don't know if that's the right thing for me. So question to you, did you experience any repercussions, anything of feedback, positive or negative, on your more broad, also speaking up and taking a stand also in the public arena?
Well, the straight answer so far is no, but I don't think that I'm anything like my extremism of activism perhaps isn't where it could be more, and maybe that time will come, and Zoe might speak more about this because I think she's further ahead than I am, but I've had one or two clients where I've been very honest, and they've said, I had one client who we had a great relationship with, and he was just on the verge of retiring, and it was really interesting because I'd worked with him for several years, and I told him this, and I said, I'm going to stop working with clients who aren't interested in talking to me about this and who aren't prepared for this to be at least part of the conversation. And he said, oh, well, we better stop our coaching then, kind of as a joke. But then he said, you know what, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I really love bird watching. And it was, and he started talking about his love of nature, and it was a shame in a way because obviously as a professional coaching relationship it was just coming to an end, and he was going off, and he is now in his retirement exploring. I know what he can do, but there's a couple of things about this. I think first of all, I would say that we always talk explicitly with our clients about contracting. And so for me, it's just a very simple addition to the contracting conversation. And you can. So we're going to move on, aren't we, to this kind of conversation around, is it right for coaches to coach with a point of view? You said about the ICF statement at the start, Carsten. I just have a very strong opinion that first of all, we're kidding ourselves if we think that we can coach without a point of view, because we all have points of view, and I think we're almost deceiving ourselves if we think that we somehow are able to operate without being influenced by our experiences and our beliefs. So let's get authentic about that. But then the other thing is, and I remember learning this in the language of the coaching training that you and I did, Carsten, when we did it together. There was always this conversation about ethical and ecological integrity. Do you remember? And so we always used to talk about the ecology of coaching and paying attention to that. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because so for my mind, all we're saying is we were talking about ecology probably with a pair of blinkers on. Now we're talking about ecology in the widest sense, both in the sense of society and in terms of environment. And so to me, it's entirely congruent that we have a coaching conversation that takes into account the widest ecological context. And I'm now involved in the leadership of the Climate Coaching Alliance, 1,500 coaches globally, and our collective view really is and mission really is to challenge the coaching profession on the one hand, and then to work with coaches to enable them to accelerate, if you like, the agency of leaders, to enable leaders to tap into whatever influence they can in their organizations, to make whatever change they can, one day at a time. and we're very clear that that it's perfectly right for coaches to do that with the point of view that that's the right thing to do. It's not just about that, obviously, but it's creating the conditions where that can be part of the conversation. And to and answer a kind of a question that you asked in a way as well. If I have had one or two clients where, well, I certainly have one or two clients that I have not taken on because I know that's not what they want. And I can think of one client where I've kind of allowed it to end because I didn't feel that was going to be possible. Mm-hmm. So but other than that, no. And I mean, I guess you could say it's also quite fortuitous that now things are so much into the mainstream. It's so much easier to speak out and not be seen to be a crazy green kind of Greenpeace sort of whatever. There was a time where there was no credibility. I think what's interesting now is that even Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion, whilst they are polarizing and people may have problems with and challenges to that, there is so much more broad mainstream support for them now than there was. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel as though I'm asking myself questions not only about my purpose but my identity as well. Am I a coach that is quite active, or even an activist? Am I being active? Bringing activism into my coaching, or, well, if the coaching profession turns around and says, Stuart, oh no, that's terrible, you shouldn't have such a strong point of view about that, then that's when I say, okay, I take off my coaching hat and I say I'm an activist who still coaches. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there are many other questions around identity. Am I a bridge? I do believe I am. As an ex-CFO, I do see myself as a bit of a Trojan horse. I'm probably able to get into boardrooms and executive teams and have conversations with that badge that gives you that sort of some kind of credibility in the eyes of those people, but not lacking authenticity around contracting, but nevertheless that credibility but then having the real conversations. So being a bridge in that way, I think there's also a bit of being an opinion leader. I feel that I'm probably only just in the early days now of speaking out more and publishing on LinkedIn and things like this, but I'd like to be doing a lot more of that. I definitely see myself as a disruptor, but also as a citizen, as a custodian of this beautiful world that we live in, for future generations. So
So Stuart, maybe if we take that scenery and put it so that maybe I see three pockets here. So one is kind of activists who are in this mode of protesting, of saying, mm-hmm, it's not good enough, you guys have to change, how dare you, that kind of thing, right? And that's one step. Then there is organizations, and we have Nathan Stuck with us, who is part of the B Corp movement, mm-hmm, which is certifying organizations who are making an effort to be socially inclusive, to reduce their carbon footprint, yeah, and do the right things, follow the 17 sustainable goals of the United Nations. So more like this, working with organizations, with businesses to help them be better every day, knowing that they'll never be perfect. And then there's probably the broad range of organizations where maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's that's not for us, I can't see how we are connected to that. Maybe I'm oversimplifying, but let's take that, yep, map of the world as a yep, simple model right now. So yep, where do you see what needs to? The title of this keynote is called "What Keeps You Up at Night." So where do we need to invest our energy as company members, as position holders, as coaches? Where do you think we need to invest our energy to make a real impact?
Yeah, and I think in a sense, what you're describing is a spectrum, isn't it, of more extreme to more conventional, and some what you describe as the B Corp, I think, is an excellent example of real change that can happen, that is manageable, but isn't necessarily totally radical. I think to some extent, I think we all have to start by looking at ourselves and asking ourselves, where are our talents? Where are our passions? Where do those things lie? Zoe will talk about this later, but she's decided that actually where she doesn't feel that she can really viscerally operate anywhere other than just because then in the more extreme activism now. I'm not there yet, because I feel as though as that ex CFO, I can still bridge. I can still wrestle with the old paradigm world, and somehow disrupt in a constructive way and hopefully accelerate change. That's my belief. I'm constantly challenging myself about how to keep doing that, and to keep checking myself that I'm not just being complicit and walking away with my coaching fee each month. And I think that's something that we all have to look at ourselves, in the mirror really hard. That's that fantastic phrase, back in where were all the coaches in 2008 in the recession? They were getting their invoices in. Where are all the coaches in the climate change? Still getting our invoices in, right? So we've got to really challenge ourselves hard on this. All I can do is, if there's coaches in the room, all I can do is encourage us all to not to underestimate. I think that the coaching profession, I think that the role of a coach, we have a really privileged position to have really powerful, intimate, powerful, authentic conversations with leaders, and we are about enabling our clients to achieve goals. We can enable them to think harder about what those goals should be, and to challenge them and to support them to stretch the ambition of their goals, to be more looking at this area, and to enable them to explore all the different avenues that they can pursue, whether that's B Corp, whether that's whatever it might be. We know that the carbon footprint of any single organization, every single household, has the potential to improve, and we all have the ability to do something about it. So the truth is that what you were describing earlier is, people go to work and they work in this, and you said, somehow the context prevents people from doing anything. Well, that's a belief. You can either believe that there's something you can do, or you shift that belief. And by the way, we're supposed to be good as coaches at shifting beliefs, or helping people to shift their beliefs. So let's have a go at that as well.
Make your own medicine. Yes, absolutely. And Stuart, back to the subject of the conference, opportunity and or opportunism, when it comes to organizational purpose. What do you see prevailing? What's your reflection on that when you look at the world out there, that the companies that you're in contact with, the organizations?
Well, we know that there's a lot of greenwash still going on. You could argue that at one level COP26 is one great big greenwash, because some of the reality is still being denied. 1.5 degrees, keeping 1.5 degrees alive, it's a great strapline, and we're all hoping that that's true, but the evidence is increasingly saying that it's not realistic. But look, I also know a lot of people who are involved in all of that work, and we've all got to have a go somewhere, and working at the systemic level is the hardest of all. I think we all have a duty to work both within ourselves to challenge our own mindset and our own resilience to deal with like, if you really face up to what's happening here, this is challenging for our mental health, right? My grandchildren may not be able to enjoy the life I've enjoyed. That does not make me feel good on a daily basis. So we need to work ourselves. But if we allow ourselves just to be disabled by our mental health, a negative mental health reaction to that, then we lose any agency. So we have to work on ourselves first. Then we work on our own immediate, personal lives. I haven't taken a flight for 2 years, and I want to avoid flying as far as possible for the rest of my life. We're all making different choices about this. Then we look at our world of work, whether it's our own immediate team or our organization we work within, and then we can look beyond and we can work with our community. Who in this room is having any kind of conversation with the people in your neighborhood or in your community about what some community clean energy solutions could be found for your community, or electric vehicles, or there's so many things that could be done, and also at the wider systemic level. I'm getting involved in the Climate Coaching Alliance. That's one small way of doing that. All of us can look at where our professional and personal context and see organizations and places where we can go and exert our influence, shape opinions. So there's so much that can be done, to be honest. And that's in that whole kind of nested, self, other and building out to the macro systemic level. At the end of the day, I think, the scale of shift that's required is far bigger than any of us really realize. I'm going to go back to this melting of the permafrost. As authentic leaders and as human beings, I just don't think that we can, with a clear conscience, not use our leadership influence to accelerate whatever change is needed. And the one other thing I really wanted to say is that this is for our society and for our the future generations, but it's also for our organisations, because this societal change that's happening, the attitudes that are changing, this is shifting rapidly, and I think it's just going to get exponential. It's so obvious now. The horse has bolted, and so to be relevant, even in 5 years' time, certainly 10 years' time, any organisation needs to be making real change now. Another way of saying that is, I think if opportunism is just morally and ethically wrong and probably criminal, it's also foolish commercially. It is an opportunity commercially to do something about this, but it's also more than that. It's a duty and it's an obligation, I think, for future generations, if not for people today. So, but at the end of the day, I guess you've got to live it. We start with a clear and authentic purpose and intention. Be clear about our identity. How do we see ourselves? We don't just have one identity. I think, in truth, I'm a coach and I'm an activist, and I'm a citizen, and I'm a guardian and a custodian. I'm all of these things. And in each of the contexts of those are different identities. What is my intention day by day? And then just live it out in our daily lives, one conversation at a time, one relationship at a time, one strategy at a time, one action at a time, one day at a time, and just make every single conversation count, make every relationship count, make every strategy include this, make every action bear this in mind. I know I sound like I'm a bit of an evangelist, and that's probably true. I think these truths have to be spoken in the world of business, and I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that we need to be this honest with ourselves and with each other. Obviously, very, very keen to hear others' views as well.
And I'll open it up to questions in a minute. I have one last question to you, Stuart. Something that maybe I can share, that sometimes after our discussion, I felt touched, but I also felt a bit depressed. Like, oh my God, we're all doomed. We're all gonna die. I mean, which is true, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And my question is, how can we realize what's going on? How can we be serious about that without getting into collective depression? I mean, how can we maintain? You mentioned it with mental health.
Yep.
How do you do that? How do you feel the pain and the urge on the one hand side, and still feel ready to inspire others, feel ready also to be upbeat about what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and I think it's a really important part of this whole debate. And certainly in the Climate Coaching Alliance, we find that when we have a lot of different events and conversations, a lot of people are sort of yearning to find out how do I have these conversations with my clients, and how can I bring this into the conversation more. But a lot of people do bring that very same question. It's like, Jesus Christ, this is so depressing. How do I deal with this? And then how do I help my clients deal with this? So I think that we've got to, it comes back to what I said earlier. We've got to start with ourselves and find a way to do this. I mean, I don't know about you, but the hardest conversations for me are the ones with my children. And to be able to find a way to have this conversation with them that doesn't depress them, and yet it's inauthentic not to have the conversation with them. I'd like to be able to sort of say, oh, there's a magic bullet and it's all going to be fine, but it's not. So, resilience, and this as the author of several books on the subject, Carsten, resilience is about working out how to deal with adversity. We can't escape from the adversity. What we have to do is dial up our resilience strategies. and that's why we're probably going to be in business for a long time, whatever happens. And so, and I don't, on the one hand, I'd probably like to make an apology for making you feel that way, but but equally I don't, because I would be, I wouldn't be, I would feel that there would be a lack of honesty and authenticity if we're hiding from it. I think this is the problem. I think people are hiding from it. We're all hiding from it. If we're on it, we're all kind of in a denial because it's too hard. So turn that around. How do we start by role modeling whatever it takes to be resilient? Also, but not that, still to be incredibly compassionate with others and recognizing that that's not so easy for everybody. I mean, let's face it, it's a lot easier for those of us who live in comfortable houses and with comfortable jobs and everything else. It's a hell of a lot harder for those people who, are in these, on these islands that are going to be, kind of decimated, or in slums in deprived areas of, the Indian subcontinent, and they've not caused any of this. How you tell them to get resilient? How can we argue that it's difficult for us to find a bit of resilience and just crack on and do whatever we can do?
Yeah, and I think part of coaching is also to challenge and to destabilize the system. So my emotional reaction was the reaction of my system trying to cope with your views, with your insights, and trying to make sense of that. So that's the way I see it, and that led to this this great session, this great conference here. So I'm very thankful for that. So don't feel bad.
No, likewise.
So, and I'm opening up for question now. Please feel free to raise your hand if you want to open your mic, or you can write into the chat. I'll give you a couple of seconds or minutes to, and it's, we are amongst us, we are only 42 participants, so it's really intimate. So you can simply open your mic if you want to, or we will just look at the chat, what is coming in. And Stuart, you may want to look at the chat as well.
Yeah, I'm just going back. There's a lot in there.
There is. It's a full book. So let's see. Oh, there is a question. Nathan. Hey, Nathan, good to see you.
Good to see you. Look, I can put my hand over my hand. That's fun. Good to see you as well. Stuart, you mentioned, I was trying to type this out and it got way too long. You used the term that I use all the time, Trojan horse. And like, I'll go back and forth sometimes, even with B Lab, who oversees B Corp certification. And I say, I'm in the deep South, I'm in Atlanta. The language you're using doesn't work for me because the CEOs and CFOs haven't come around to that way of thinking. They're not talking about climate justice. And so as I have these conversations and I'm trying to win people over, what language do you use to kind of get in? Because I always say, get your foot in the door and then start chipping away and breaking down and getting, you can use different terms and accomplish the same goals and get them nodding their heads in the same way. So from a climate perspective, what are some of the tips you might have? Because I do it a lot on the holistic corporate social responsibility side, but not necessarily on the climate side.
Yeah. And obviously the mainstream is probably helping for this language to become, gradually more acceptable. But I know that there's still many people and organizations where it's still very tough. I guess I'd go back to the first principles of coaching again, which is that we have to always start where the client is. We have to start with where they are at, and that would be maybe that individual that you're coaching, and also the organization that they are in. So you start from there and say, well, where would you like to get to? Might there be somebody in that organization who might be more likely to listen to you? Might there be somebody you could have a conversation with where you might be able to start forming a small coalition of people, going to Kotter's theory of change, start by, defining and being clear with yourself and then being able to convey to others what is the urgency here, and then building a coalition of people around you. But recognizing that, within that organization at that moment in time, talking words like climate injustice may be too strong for them. So start where your client is, and that's there's the ambition is big, and we have to, but we can only start with wherever we are. As we know in coaching, it's always the case, right? We can only start where we are, and we might have a long-term ambition and a dream, but we also have to think about what's the next step.
Thanks, Nathan, for breaking the ice and then posing the first question. Thomas, you have your hand open. Your hand up, sorry. And open, maybe.
Yeah, Stuart, my question is around the topic of lifelong learning and conscious. When I'm in a shop and I'm buying something in these days, and I don't know what kind of CO2 footprint I'm generating here. No idea, I don't know. So I understand I have to develop something, my knowledge, to improve my knowledge. That is stimulated by my conscious. Just for example, and my question to you is, how would you say, is it possible to support clients to develop a conscious, their conscience?
How do you enable a client to develop environmental conscience?
Yes.
Do you mean a conscience, or do you mean
conscience? To be aware on the impact on the climate, the business activities.
I think it's consciousness.
Consciousness. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I often go back to that children's fire analogy. I know it may sound like a broken record today, me saying this, but I think that we do have to keep thinking about future generations, and so it's what yeah, I'm in a way I'm kind of yeah. There's so many different ways that you can approach this. So again, coming back to the in coaching, we tap into people's values. What's most important to you? What's your legacy? What legacy do you want to leave? I think it's those sorts of questions that are the avenues into what's most important for people, and then you enable. It's not about trying to enforce or impose these values upon people. It's eliciting them from within them, because what you will find in most cases is that people do have values that speak to this, and people do have wishes for a future that means that something needs to be done about this. So it's just that curiosity and questioning and holding that space for that exploration, rather than immediately rushing into what are your profit goals for the next quarter. But like we said before as well, the important thing in coaching is contracting and consent, and if they don't want to talk about it, you can only lead a horse to water.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Thanks, Thomas. I think there were more questions in that area, like what kind of language to use, but I think you elaborated on that, kind of creating that space where this is an option to talk about, making it kind of possible, inviting it as a topic, and then, the topic has to be kind of there. I think now is time to digest a little bit. And I would invite all of you to 15 minutes of reflection with each other in small groups about what you listen to. And Stuart, if you may, can stay here with us.
Sure.
And then we will also make sure that we have some original voice from you also for the media later on. So starting 15 minutes of reflection sessions. What did you take away? What stuck with you? How is this resonating with you, or not at all? Are you in the wrong conference all of a sudden? What's going on here? So please be as open as you wish, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. And so see you then. So what do you think? Really interesting, isn't it? I think Stuart kind of credibly brings across his journey from a senior executive in an industry where he had his doubts, where he wasn't quite sure, and he kind of pushed it away. And then these doubts or these thoughts or these parts of him became stronger and stronger, leading him to change his career for the first time. And now, after 10 years, leading him to change his career once more into a more, even more direct direction towards activism and for being engaged for more social and climate justice. So very inspiring, I think. Let me know what you think. Please send us an email at leaderstalk@leadership-choices.com. leaderstalk@leadershipchoices.com. Looking very much forward to hear your thoughts. See you next time around.
This was an episode of Leaders Talk, the interview podcast portraying leaders who are committed to better leadership, better organizations, and a better world, powered by Leadership Choices. If you want to give us feedback, please send an email to leaderstalk@leadership-choices.com. Thank you for listening.